Hey everybody, today we're going to be starting our lecture on Intro to Mendel. So you're going to find your Chapter 12 packet. It's the one with the two super cute goats on the front. And then you're going to flip over to page 3. It should look like this, Lecture to Intro to Mendel. All right, so as we go through this, you guys are going to be focusing on the words that are in red. That's what you will be writing down. So let us begin. The first thing we're going to talk about is an allele. And an allele is a version of a gene. So what that means is that certain organisms, so for example, we're going to talk about pea plants. Pea plants can have a gene that codes for flower color. So they can either be white or purple. Another gene can code for the color of the seed. So that could be yellow or green. Now, when we talk about those possibilities like white or purple or yellow or green, those traits are actually called alleles. So if we look at the picture here, we have our genetic information, our chromosome. The chromosome on the right came from mom, the chromosome on the left came from dad. And then if we look at this band right down here, that band is a gene and it's coding for hair color. Now, if you look at your parents and think, okay, well, they both have different hair colors. Mom might have brown hair, dad might have black hair. The different colors would be the alleles. So brown hair would be an allele, black hair would be an allele. Now, when we look at ourselves, if you have blonde hair, you still get those alleles from mom and dad. So we have two alleles for a particular characteristic, like blonde hair, and we would get one from mom and one from dad. Now, as we go through this lecture, we're going to focus mainly on the basic vocab so that we can continue on with making Punnett squares and learning about different probability of passing these alleles from parents to offspring. So the next term we're going to focus on are heterozygous versus homozygous. So heterozygous, again, you guys are writing just what is in red for that definition. Means that we're going to have two different alleles. So that means for any characteristic you have, if it's heterozygous, they're going to be two different. So if we look at the picture down here at the bottom, we see these flowers with the letter B. Now, the one in the middle would be considered heterozygous. Now, they are not different letters, but they are different sizes. Next to the word heterozygous, on the left-hand side, it says hetero. That's where you're going to write this word different on the left-hand side on that little line. So a heterozygous organism means that we're going to have one allele for one color. So for example, if we're looking at the flowers here, we're going to have one allele for a purple flower and one allele for a white flower. That's what gives us that big B and little b. Another word we use to describe heterozygous would be hybrid. Now, homozygous means that we're going to have two of the same alleles for a characteristic. Again, on the left-hand side, we see that prefix homo, meaning same. Now, because it is the same, that means that we're going to have both of the alleles for a purple flower or both of the same alleles for the white flower. So if you look here, that first one, we have big B, and then at the bottom, the last one, we have little b. Another word we can use for a homozygous is purebred. Now, a couple different ways to think about the differences between heterozygous and homozygous. If we look at that word hybrid, think about we are currently in a hybrid school schedule. So that means that we are in school one day and remote the other day. So it's two different things put together. I also like to think of dogs because dogs can be a hybrid. So like a golden doodle, which is a golden retriever and a poodle, or a Schnorky, which is a Schnauzer and a Yorkie, and that's just pretty much fun to say. Homozygous purebred, I like to think like a purebred dog, so just a dog that is strictly German Shepherd, things like that. Another way to remember the difference, you can think heterozygous and homozygous. If you are in a heterosexual relationship, that is male and female, so it's two different genders. If you are in a homosexual relationship, you will have either two males or two females. Again, both of the same gender. All right, go ahead and flip to page 4. Now, when we talk about Mendelian traits, we can talk about our the traits that we have, and they are either going to be dominant or recessive. And what that means is that some traits are stronger and they will be expressed, meaning we will see them, versus a recessive trait, which we might not have. So dominant is a trait that is going to show up in a heterozygous organism. So that heterozygous organism we talked about has a big letter and a little letter. That big letter represents that dominant trait. So for example, brown eyes would be a dominant trait, so we would represent that with a capital B. A recessive trait is a trait that is hidden in a heterozygous organism. And we're going to write that as a lowercase letter. So that means for blue eyes, we would use a lowercase b. So for this example, dad at the bottom has brown eyes, mom has blue eyes, and the child has brown eyes. The brown eyes are displayed, but he is still carrying that little b, and that little b is hidden. Now, this is important, and this will come into play more next week when we start Punnett squares, because that child, even though that child has brown eyes, he does still have that little b for blue eyes, which means that he has the potential to pass that information on to his offspring. So though he has brown eyes, he could have a child that has blue eyes. The last thing for today is we're going to talk about discussing and describing traits. So when we talk about that, we can look at the genotype and phenotype. So the genotype is the genetic makeup of an organism. So that means basically what genes they have. And when we talk about a genotype, we write these out as letters. So in the example part, I want you guys just to write big B, big B. Now, we have to think about it as if I looked at this mouse down here, I wouldn't say, oh, look it, he's got big B hair color. That sounds ridiculous. You don't know what the heck I'm saying. What does big B represent? But we are using these letters when we are creating our Punnett squares, which is going to help us determine the probability of our offspring. So these letters do play a part, but what we focus more on is the phenotype of these traits, and that means the way the organism expresses that trait, or what the genes actually look like. So for these, we write them out as words, and then in that example, we would say brown fur color. So again, I would then look at that mouse and say, oh, look at that mouse has brown fur color. Makes a little bit more sense. All right, so make sure that you guys have pages 3 and 4 completely filled out. Once you are done with that, you're going to flip the page and take a look at page 5, model 1. It's that top half of the page. I want you to try to fill out model 1, numbers 1 through 5. And then we will be going through that next week. So please make sure page 5, number 1 through 5 is completed. If you have any questions, let me know.